also fits very nicely in that. In the sense that there the context is outwardly, but it is written in such a way that the author expects you to accept it as mundane. So I think that is a beautiful go-between for fantasy and realism. Archana, welcome back.
Yeah.
Yeah, my internet is spooky. It's haunted.
Which is fitting because we are discussing speculative fiction.
Right. Yeah, so this question was about the binary between literary fiction and speculative fiction. So we talked about Ankit's essay. We also talked about this hierarchization that we see between which faces literary fiction, which, by the way, no one knows how to define, at least on this panel. So that's based sort of above by writers like Ghosh, Amitav Ghosh, and I put that's a notch above. Like, this is serious book fiction, this is a realist, speculative fiction can't fit that bill, therefore it's more like genre fiction, popular fiction, so different from highbrow fiction. So we were talking about questioning that binary, how far is that binary accurate, or what that's we were basically talking about that.
I think she's frozen. I think she lost.
Well, this podcast is becoming increasingly performative, so it's a nice thing, I suppose. So maybe we'll wait a minute for her to come back.
This question of magical realism, while we're waiting for her, also that I in the excitement of answering, I forgot to address that. I agree that it acts as a bridge, but I don't know if magical realism like anymore is also used as much as a term. I may not know that very well, but what do you think? Like do we have something called Indian magical realism? Like, I can't think of any word like that.
Like Salman Rushdie, maybe.
Yeah. And recently I read this really charming book called Latitudes of Longing by Shubhangi Thurur. So I think that was a little bit magical realism. And so I have been thinking about magical realism and how sometimes things are done in regional fiction, but they are not labeled as such. So I was thinking about the fiction of Nitin. He already, like, I think people have written about this in Korean also, how he was kind of the pioneer of science fiction adventure stories, they call it. But his adult novels, so for example, there's one called Kedar Raja, which I remember very vividly because it's not a very well-known book by him, but it has this, like, it is not fantasy because there is nothing in the book that is out of the ordinary. But right towards the end, in the middle of all that ordinary suffering, there is an element of, you could say, adhyatmic or spiritual. But at that time, or even in this context, when you think about magical realism and what it means, you could look at it like that. And I think those kind of elements are also present in more of his books, and I am sure books like this are also there in other languages. Another author who does this really well, so I read one of his books and I think I reviewed that for Korean also, which is Vinod Kumar Shukla, who writes in Hindi. So I read his A Window into the World, which is a very, very great translation of all the whimsy, all the magic. That's, I don't know how good it is in Hindi because I have not.
Are you ever watching me?
It's quite magical even in its translation. So that I would say is a very good example of magical realism. Even in that, so it doesn't really have any plot. So the realism is very, very
সবাই তো
mundane,
চিনিস তোর বলার কথা এটা
yet there is an element of very
ও রাখছি
beautiful, very whimsical uh, magic or fantasy, which is almost escapist. But yes, I would say those are the examples that come to my mind.
No, in the context of India, even I would say Novarun Bhattacharya, Kangal Marshat is very, or for children's fiction is actually full of it, full of examples. I would think Leela Majumdar's work, Shishendu Bhattacharya's work, all of it is incorporates a lot of magical realism. I think. Like, I grew up like I did not know it was a separate category, but I grew up reading these books. So that says a lot about magical realism in Indian fiction. But is there a line that we should draw between really Orientalist ideas of India as a land of magic, that sort of a thing, and magical realism as a genre? So that might be an interesting point to think about. There's an element of Orientalism there, especially in English fiction featuring India.
So I think mostly by Indian authors, the Indian authors who do it well. So basically, native Indian authors who are part of this context. For example, the books that I talked about, they are definitely not orientalist, but at the same time, yeah, they do not also, the magical realism in them is not the magical realism of fiction from any other country. In general, magical realism is a little bit a concept which comes from the global south. So in Latin America is basically the pioneering setup of this kind of books. So I think it is a little bit, it gives a lot of space because it's very amorphous, it's not very clearly defined, and it gives a lot of space for non-hegemonic ideas to thrive. So I think it's I don't know, it gives more space than so-called fantasy, like straight cut fantasy or science fiction or realist fiction. It gives a little bit more space to explore different cultures and different myths, different traditions without the Orientalist or
So, yeah, do you want to add anything? Okay.
Oh, just that, yeah, this is like a good point. I was actually hoping that Archita would add something to this as
Yeah,
a practitioner
okay.
because, yeah,
That's
you don't like to be
okay.
hemmed in when you write it, like definitions and all. As a writer, you don't like that.
We're all coming from that sort of that sort of position, right? Philippi as a reviewer, you as an academic, I as an editor. Yeah. So that's the thing. So I think since it's already 8:15, I think we should move on to the next question, and Ochita can join in whenever she can, because we're not exactly sure what's happening with the internet.
I'm here for the time being. I don't know when my nephew.
Okay, then do you want us to? Do you have anything to add to the discussion? I'm sure you've heard most of it, or yeah.
I heard the last is about magic realism and like I don't really have much to add into it.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question, and Orchita will answer that first. So, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's only fair, right? Okay. So our first question for you is basically about the market for speculative fiction in South Asian region. What sort of leadership do you think it has? Like you especially have experience, working for the particular reviews, and what sort of people, some idea, what sort of people like reading speculative fiction, what sort of socio-economic background they come from, and or some stylistic, like there's a really, let's look at Amish Tripathi's work. It belongs to a very different sort of say stylistic and thematic genre from say something that Vandana Singh would write. right? So there's a huge body of very popular speculative fiction written in English in India. So what do you think what do you think sets that body apart from speculative fiction and like the term as a global phenomenon in the 21st century? So do you have anything to add to that, like about the readership, about this sort of stylistic features of
Well, I think like there's not just one like one market for speculative fiction in the South Asian context. Like you have people who are growing up on Harry Potter and discovering other English and American fantasy novels. Then you also have people growing up with their local folk tales and reading works in translation. You also have people who are reading Amish Tripathi and like similar writers, but not really exploring other works by India-based or diasporic writers. Then you also have the young adult market, which is
right?
very popular, and the young adult market like that just seems like a separate thing by itself, whether that's young adult fantasy or like Twilight or
Right.
like that's the whole thing. And then I think it's also the whole the short fiction market, which is the mostly a lot of American magazines, and like nowadays we have a lot of magazines like from all over the world who are publishing writers from all over the world. So like there's a specific short fiction market. So and I feel like the ones who are approaching specific fiction from a more academic perspective, like since you are researching on it, like that gives you a very wide range of perspective of approaching it. But when you are just like a reader who's buying a book from Starbucks, you are mostly looking at the most best-selling mainstream stuff. So, so I think it's a very diverse market. And
So we'll move on to Ankit, like what do you have to like, say as an academic, like what's your perspective?
I agree with whatever I can understand what Chita is trying to signal, but I also don't have the like this sort of like I'm not very aware of what sort of market and what sort of people are reading this sort of fiction. What I do, I like what the question makes me feel is that it's also a question of marketability. How you market these books themselves. Like
Right.
if an Amish Tripathi is marketed very differently from a Tamil person. Like
Mm.
so that I don't know. Like I don't know how to take that further, but like
also, going back to the earlier discussion between literary fiction and genre fiction and magic realism, like it all depends on how you market the work. Like I think what Atwood writes would very well fall under speculative fiction, but most of her work gets nominated for the literary fiction award. A lot of like genre fiction is given a lot of stylistic elements which you can compare it with literary fiction, but those who would comment for a Cupid and a Nebulous and not the man book or anything. So the way the publishers choose to market a particular work and what labels they put on,
Right.
and then also and which awards like pick it up and promote it. And also I think plays a
Mm-hmm.
role in setting all these boundaries and definitions across genres.
Yeah, and on that note, like I live in I've lived all my life in Kolkata, so I am yet to see a Samit Basu at a Star Mark or even at the Kolkata Book Fair, but I see a lot of Amish Patti and that sort of a thing. So what sort of market do you think is, so to speak? I know it's absolutely wrong and probably a blasphemous thing to say, but this sort of niche fiction. These are published by Hachette and Penguin and all of these. You only find them on Amazon. I don't know about other cities, so Bangalore or Delhi, but here it's very difficult to find these books. So do you think they must have a readership, or else these big these big publishing houses don't have picked them up. So I feel like it's just a personal opinion I'm asking. Do you think they're exclusively marketed online for a very particular kind of audience, or what's the what's the market logic there?
I'm not. completely sure, but I think like marketing on on a website like Amazon, like there the marketing is based on like like we give you the cheapest prices, so you have a wide variety, and then like whatever fiction appeals to a person, they can pick it out and they can get it at like a lesser price, and they would have to pay went to a bookshop and pay the trade paperback price or the hardcover price. So I think online marketing is more about like trying to attract customers with the promise of discounts.
Right.
Just to add one thing, in terms of how you marketed it, the newspaper party draw on the idea of mythology, and they use the word mythology. It's also the word that you use and the images that you use. Like you use the image of a ship on cover of your book. That's going to attract audience. It's going to attract the attention. Even if that is not an audience that would leave. But with the coming that's why I also think like as Indian science fiction comes of age, as it is coming of age now, a market is developing where certain kinds of images on the cover, stuff like that, there is a Netflixization of narrative.
Yeah,
You
right.
see so much of science fictional images that you then start thinking that oh, it might be something like that. Still, luck. Yeah.
আরে তুই দেখছিস না, তোর অসুবিধা আছে তোকে নিয়ে, মানে
So, which actually
হাউ
leads
ক্যান
me
ইউ
to the
মিস
next
দ্যাট,
question,
হাউ
which
ক্যান
is
ইউ মিস
that
দ্যাট, কখন থেকে
what
হচ্ছে
do you
জিনিসটা?
think, like, the recent, it's not recent, like the journey of the speculative fiction in the South Asian region is
তাই
pretty old, like people have picked up in the 19th century
শোন শোন
onwards in
শোন,
Urdu,
চুপ
in
কর চুপ কর
Bangla,
চুপ কর
in
চুপ কর
all
চুপ কর
sorts of
চুপ চুপ চুপ,
languages.
শোন
But
শোন যেটা
the
বলছি,
recent sort of, I'd say,
see
flourishing
where
of
is Ankit's
speculative
video,
fiction,
see
especially by Indian
which
South
one is
Asian
Ankit's
writers
video,
writing
select
in
that.
English, that along with say the advent of magazines like Kolpovisho, or
Uncrop
even
it,
like
uncrop it,
publications like
alt
With
alt
Review,
alt টিপে,
independent publishing houses like Sivan. What
উফ
is
সত্যিটা কি
what
করলো
role
এটা,
do
মানে
these play? Independent, media, like not the big publishing houses, and not like
করে বোঝাবো ওটা, মানে
anything
দেখ
like
আনতে পারিস কেন, দেখ
what
alt
the
ফল্ট টিপে আনতে পারিস কেন, দেখ
these independent sort of agencies do in forwarding the cause as a form of speculative fiction and such.
আরে মানে
I think indie publishers
then
like they
alt
play a
টিপে
very
সেটা
huge
খোল,
and underrated role
alt
in
টিপ
popularizing speculative fiction, as well as promoting works by underrepresented writers or by marginalized writers,
কিচ্ছু ম্যাটার করে না
or
হচ্ছে,
when it comes to like even
দিস,
works in translation, like
চেষ্টা কর না হলে কি করে দেবে।
so I think especially like Suman has, I think
আরে
Suman, I think
উচিটা কি করলো
like the
এটা, তুই
website
কিছু
they publish is
বলছিসও না,
Banana and also without that, like a lot of people
আর
will not
ধর রাখছি আমি
come
এখন।
to know about these writers. Like many of these writers are diasporic or they're based abroad. So I think they help in a lot of cross-cultural communication. It also promote like this independent publishing in general. Like it prevents like the main for publishers from having a monopoly on the market, and from the main publishers dictating like, okay, these are the current trends and like the writers should aspire to that. It basically diversifies the.
I agree, especially about this last point about diversifying the field. Other publication that I can think about is Bluff, and like the kind of work that Bluff has been doing is absolutely incredible. And in terms of like their apologies of Tamil pulp fiction, not something that like, an audience here in the South probably that is of they read it, but then to have access to it in English in translation, and that then gets picked up. Then almost everybody knows about this publication, these authors. So I think like independent publishers also take more risks. They will try to also work with authors that are not that known. The draft again I can think of Blat, and I'm thinking of the fiction of Urhali Manikavel.
Ah,
Like I can't like when I read it, it was like something that I've never read anything like that. And then to her, I come to understand something called dual fiction. And then that becomes an introduction of whether it is anything to Suban or Monica to stuff. So yeah, I think they play a very important role in breaking and breaking the boundaries of what you can do and then diversifying the field. And this one thing about yeah, making up for that. Uh, but Confucius, especially recently, I think they've moved into also publishing translation, which is like I, when I watched when they were talking about that, they were also talking about having collaborations with other independent publishers and trying to do sort of collaborative work, which I feel that could happen. That would really save fiction in India. So, yeah, I think translations are also very important, and I think they will happen. They are happening, and they will happen.
So, Ankit, you talked about how the use of mythological retellings or mythological elements or images on the covers of popular fiction makes it more attractive to the masses. So, in the present political context, using there is a lot of speculative fiction all over the world based on Roman or Greek mythology, but doing that is not the same as writing speculative fiction mythology because it is still very much a part of our life, whether we like it or not. Do you think engaging with this mythological angle, which I think it is popular fantasy in India, do you think that is somewhere uh, can be used as a political tool actually, in the present socio-political context of the country?
Yeah, very important question. I think. Uh, Firstly, I think even before like speculative fiction or Indian science fiction took off in this big way, that it is internationally recognized from India, politicians have been using ideas that we would now obviously correctly understand as speculative ideas that exist in speculative fiction, as a Pushpak Viman. Or there was 19th in the 19th century, somebody wrote a detailed. Somebody said that they have unearthed a detailed architectural layout of something that was like a Pushpak Viman and said that the research work and it came out like yesteryear. But later in it was understood to be correct information till the 1950s, 60s, and then more recent work has shown it for what it is, which is an invention of that person who said that this is my research work. So that thing that for almost a century was understood as something that was actually a piece of speculative. So it's very difficult to really to take these two things apart and to write speculative fiction in the first place. As you rightly said that like a lot of Roman and Greek mythological figures, ideas, narratives are constantly used by the writers in the West. Use these things. So that is part of their mythology, that is part of their upbringing. But to use in this context, in the current political scenario, means obviously a very different thing and comes fraught with a lot of danger. What I can think of off the top of my head is that Vandana Singh used to write fiction of this kind in her initial, like her first collection, has many stories that have this sort of idea. Even in her recent 2018 collection, there's a story that talks about an older kingdom, etc. But in a recent, that recent 2020, I think, 2021, she was in an interview or talk, and she was acknowledging that now she thinks about it very differently. Now she thinks very differently about using alternate history which is a viable form of doing speculative fiction, but because of the context that she's writing under, and because of the use that should be put under, she thinks more, she does more research, she thinks about what is executed. I think writers are grappling with this for sure. But at the same time, I don't think that writers the writers will have to just be more inventive, I think, and maybe they will know how to use the same material, but almost as a commentary against how this material is being used right
So
now in the
do
political
not
space.
minimize the do not minimize the
Yeah,
meat.
I would
Don't
really like to
minimize the
know
meat.
such things about this.
Use alt tab if you want to
Yeah.
access OBS. Do
No,
not minimize the
I
meat.
agree with what you said. Like it's like politicians, I think they've always used like mythological or popular narratives to promote their own
Minimize করে
agendas,
করে
and
কাজ
the way
করিস
the
না।
BJP has co-opted myths from the Mahabharata or Ramayana to like
রাখছি।
promote their Hindutva culture. Like that is dangerous. Like and also to peddle like scientific misinformation about it. So I think but I think for a discerning people, like they understand when you are using a myth to make a comment, and when you're using a myth to promote scientific misinformation or religious agenda. But as writers, I think you also have to be responsible about like it's one thing to retell your story, but if anyone else chooses to appropriate for their own ends, it is dangerous. So I feel like the rich mythology that we have, like it is something that writers can use and to make a lots of relevant social comments, but at the same time, they need to be careful about how political parties might reinterpret them.
So we talked about the responsibility of the writer in an atmosphere of increasing polarization, especially in Indian context. What do you think are the responsibilities of a critic in this context? This is for Ankit. What do you think? What function do you think has been allotted to the academic in this atmosphere? What responsibility do they have?
I think the primary responsibility is to respond to these works in a fair and honest manner. That has been the responsibility of the critics throughout. But also to take into account, like Archit is saying, what the use of like obviously authors will use it, will continue to draw on this material. But I think it is a responsibility of the critic, as it has always been, to evaluate how this material is being used, and also to take into account how it is being marketed, who is talking about it, what are the factors that actually make it work for the audience. Because I guess different critics will pick on different angles, but ultimately I think you have to respond to the work that exists. And I also think that it is very important to, as a critic, because the critic's work is also bring to attention certain work. I have in my work, I have seen so much of Indian science fiction that draws on mythological ideas, and then puts a scientific spin on it that actually talks about valorization of the past, etc. That work inundates the field. But at the same time, there are works that use the same material, the same sort of mythology, the same sort of characters from the past, to actually turn it on its head and and actually act as an antidote, you might say, or as a effective opposite of what the major work is. One work that I can think of is maybe when we said like recommendation is different, but
Yeah, that's fine.
I can think of Anuradha Marva Roy's 1999 novel Idle Love, which uses which is dealing with the same thing, but she's dealing with it in the context of how dangerous this can be. So the material is still the same. The material is still mythological. It's still thinking about this character and how it is being used. but the commentary is very different. I think critics need to bring out and bring to attention more of these insightful sci-fi. I think that is definitely the responsibility.
I think that's absolutely. I completely agree with you. Like speculative writers of speculative fiction, Chita included, to create a space for ambiguity, as it were, right? It could be anything. Of course, there are more explicit forms of doing, but most of these things create a feel of ambiguity. It's up to the critic to sort of channelize that ambiguity in a particular, in an ethical direction, as it were, especially in a polarized atmosphere such as now. So I think both the writer and the critic have a great sort of burden, as it were, on their shoulders to this. Which sort of brings us to our last question about the escapist function of. And don't take me wrong. Don't take this in the wrong way. So it's a very positive. I mean, it's not positive, of course. What about our surroundings is positive anymore? Maybe, right? There is a middle of a pandemic. There's a war going on. Okay, so the list goes on and on. We all know what we are going through. But do you think speculative fiction offers an avenue out of this sort of fine mess that we have landed in? Do you think it offers possible? Of course, it does. But what is your take on it? How does it offer avenues of redemption? Avenues of change. This is basically speculative fictions try for self-justification, but I will look at it differently. How does it open up paths for redemption, for correcting things, and for the lack of a better word, for escape from our prison?
Well, I think speculative fiction at its heart helps us to reimagine the world. Like, yeah, fine, like the world is a shitty place, but with the power of storytelling, we can imagine a better future. So, like, I think, like the new genres of solar punk and folk punk,
Right.
like, it's about using technology and science to imagine a sustainable future for all, where where humans and nature can live in harmony. And so yeah, basically it's like getting speculative fiction inspires us, motivates us, and helps us to imagine a better future for all of us, regardless of race, gender, caste. Like, it empowers writers to to imagine a better world.
Yeah. Shejati, would you like to comment as a reader and a reviewer?
So I think right now, the escapist function of speculative fiction cannot be downplayed or cannot be taken as a negative connotation, because we need to stay sane through all of this that is happening. And if something provides us happiness in that context, I think that's great. So that is one way in which speculative fiction can definitely help. I myself love comic fantasy and comic sci-fi. Um, and of course, as Ulla said, it, it does empower writers and through them readers to imagine a better world. It also uh, helps them create a cautionary tale of what the world might be if we keep on going the way that we are. So yeah, I think there are many ways in which speculative fiction or any kind of fiction for that matter can help us make sense of all of this, or just help us power through it so that we can be stay sane enough to focus on what we can do in the world of better place. So escapism is definitely a very important fiction.
Also, I would add that escapist fiction gives us the power to imagine positive narratives of the world. Like, a lot of histories are steeped in bloodshed and tragedy, and when you're reimagining that history or imagining a future of the oppressed people in a positive And in a liberated setting, you are giving them hope. You are teaching people to be resilient. So I think escapism helps us to imagine a more optimistic and positive future. And without that positivity, I mean, you can't really hope to make sustainable change. Like if you think that everything will end in chaos and in sadness, then you will not have the motivation to rebel and find a way out. But if you have the thought of the light at the end of the tunnel, then you will strive towards that light.
That's absolutely very, very important. I mean, it's undeniable. That's right. It's us keep dreaming about a better future. If nothing else. Ankit, do you have anything to add? The last question.
I agree with these are also the things that I was thinking about. So most of them have been indicated by three of you. Um, yeah, I think the one thing that I would say is that it is very difficult now. It's actually very challenging, more challenging than ever to write speculative narratives right now. As you mentioned, in a world that is going through changes of this nature, where it is, as they say, as medium goes, that science fiction is the literature of today. It could also extend it to speculative fiction because now the kind of reality that we live in is very difficult, and the speed at which this reality is changing very difficult and almost like book of an SF novel, as most people say. I think that that makes it very difficult but also very exciting to almost think of the kind of speculative narrative that will come out in the future. How do you destabilize this reality? How do you start thinking about different ways from here? And obviously this will happen, and it will portend a lot of hope. So yeah, the other thing that I also talked about in the conclusion to my essay was that I think I don't think most of us when we talk about the thing that will change or will be the one figure that will change everything. It will be one of the four that will help us. But the actual work will have to happen elsewhere. The
Right.
problem is not a problem of speculative fiction. It is a problem that exists in the world. It's very complicated. So speculative fiction will play its role as other aspects of our reality will also play its role. So yeah, it definitely gives some amount of hope.
It's a sort of a really sober reality check from Ankit. On that note, we'll actually move on to the end of this podcast. We will, of course, on a more, I don't know, hopeful and personal note, we are going to give you a book recommendations. Of course, this is like personally my favorite part of the podcast. Yeah, that's yeah. Yeah. So we'll begin with Ochika. Like, what are the books of speculative fiction which have inspired you, which you want everyone else to read, and which have
It's
moved
so
you?
it's not fair to like put them in like
I
just
know.
list. Like for me, I'm personally very fascinated by world building, especially in the high fantasy universes, and I think Brandon Sanderson does that really well. Like I would definitely, if anyone wants to write fantasy and create their own fictional worlds with their own needs for society and politics and the culture, then definitely Sanderson's Mistborn novels are very accessible and a very good place to start, along with all the works that are in his Osmier universe. So like Samsung is like my go-to recommendation for whenever people ask me for like
Right.
fantasy recommendations, and I personally love fantasy that has a very fairy tale feeling. So if you like fantasy romances, I would definitely recommend Uprooted by Naomi Novik and the Bear and the Night, the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, which is like Russian history and folklore. And another work that influenced me a lot in terms of aesthetics was Neil Gaiman's The Sandman
Right, of course.
series. Like the way he combined different genres and used mythology and told the story over like 10 volumes. Like Sandman is not just the story of the the seven main characters being there, and also the minor characters who have their own
Right. Yeah.
creative arcs, which are very, I think, very well explored. And and also like recently I've been not recently, like before the pandemic started, I discovered the works of Ted Chiang,
Oh, yeah.
called
You know what? I was
Universal.
going to add that to my recommendations list now. It's that.
Like, as you know, the second, like definition of speculative fiction, like what Vandana Singh said about it being thought experiment, like that's something that that Young does very well, and like I was like every word that he's written, like I loved it. Like both his short story collections are amazing, and also when it comes to short fiction, definitely Vandana Singh, I love like whatever short story I discovered the first online, like I've read all of it and loved it. And yeah, that's all I can think of off the top of my head. Oh, it is also this book called Among Others by Joe Watson, which is within the form of a diary. So it's very similar to the whole the diary writing format, like the diary of Anne Frank and all, except
Okay, right.
like the child who has had a traumatic accident in her past, which resulted in the death of her sister, and then she's sent away to a boarding school. And she uses magic to cope with the trauma. She's very introverted, loves to read books, will do anything to get out of social occasions and just like spend the time reading books. So intensely relatable, and also the writer uses magic in the world. Like it's sort of fantasy, or sort of like magic realism, but they like to. So that's something like I don't want to give spoilers, but I really found it very well done, and I found the book very heartwarming.
Obviously, we should read more heartwarming books in this particular, climate, obviously. So, Shruti, our resident book reviewer, so yeah, obviously,
Yes.
really looking
So
forward.
I am going to talk about the books that I don't get to talk about in my column because they're I don't know about it, so I need not shout out a few stuff about them. But I'm going to do that now, which is the Seymour Quinn Prophecies by Samit Basu, which I think all of you reference. So it found me at a time in my life when I desperately needed a laugh, and did it deliver? It delivered splendidly, even though I had some complaints about the last installment, but it was totally worth it. And yeah, you have to read a book that has an aloo gobi dessert and the Prince of Watercool
Oh
and the
man,
Sambar Island. So
oh,
yes, please go
that's
read it.
sweet. I
And
will.
yeah, so I think all my books are going to be comic. The next one that I want to talk about is um, the Lady Jane series, which I have been reading. It's by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jodie Meadows. So it reimagines historical events or old classics and adds a lot of humor and a lot of fantasy to it. So, for example, the first book is Lady Jane, which is about England's infamous most Queen Jane Grey, who has the most short-lived reign in the history of England. And there, Catholics and Protestants are imagined as people who can shapeshift into animals and people who cannot. And this shapeshifting ability is not limited to glamorous things like, wolves and like that. There is a character that turns into a horse. There is a character that turns into a mouse, and things like that. So it's just the wrong. It's just so much fun. And I think my third recommendation is going to be Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. So it is a tribute to Three Men in a Boat by Jerome, which is a classic of the uh, Victorian humor genre. So it is about a bunch of time traveling historians who go from 21st century to the Victorian era. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but I just want to say that the main driver of the plot is a cat whose name is Princess Arjuman. And
Sold.
another main character is an English bulldog named Cyril, who is the most adorable goofbally dog I have ever met in fiction. Um, Another shout out to Indra from Tass's Devourers. But I won't speak again about this because I've already written about it in the column. But we were talking about the about using myths and creative fiction, and I think in this book he does that like in a very very brilliant manner, where he takes both Norse myths and I say Sundarbans, which is not mainstream Hindu mythology. It's mishmash of Hindu and Muslim mythology at the margins. So he takes these two and mashes them up really nicely, and it's so atmospheric, dark, and haunting. It's beautiful. So yeah, those are my recommendations.
Okay. So we move on to Ankit.
Thanks for these recommendations. The Devourers is also in my recommendations list, and Edith, your review of it is absolutely. I really like your review as well. I I don't know what to recommend because like it's impossible to listen. So what I thought of is things that randomly come into my head, and I'm going to trust that. So I recently read the graphic novel series Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. That was absolutely a breathtaking journey. It's not over yet, so it recent installments also after a break of I think about 3 years came out again in January. So that is something I would highly recommend anybody to read. It's called Saga. Uh, then last year I read this book called The Animals in That Country. It's a very timely book because it deals with a virus, and that virus does things to humans, and it has a lot to say about human-animal relations. And yeah, without giving anything else away, that's another book that I would highly recommend. The other is Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. It's a book that is uh, it deals with racism in America in ways that are I have not seen this sort of treatment given to the issue of racism in America, issue, uh, black-white relations. It just as a hint, it has. Uh, Actually, I don't want to give any hints. It would spoil it. So, yeah, just read it. Just read it. Came out I think last year or the year before. The other, all of this side, the other book that I really enjoyed reading was The Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking.
Oh,
Absolutely adorable book. Presumably written for a younger audience than us, but give me more of I would add to
okay.
yeah. So that I really, really nice, really cheerful book. I really enjoyed reading. Other than that, I already mentioned Idle Love by another Marwara. Yeah, dystopic narrative, but very, very prescient, very important book from the 90s in the context of India's politics as well. That's one. Everything by Vandana Singh already mentioned. And everything by Vandana Singh. Yeah. And I've written about this book in the essay. I would recommend it again. The Black Dwarfs of the Good Little Way. Uh, it's actually a book that I found by mistake. It's still not talked about enough. when people talk about recent Indian SF fiction. And it's, again, very good political commentary. Tracing out the history of the Indian nation. Very inventive ways as well. And yeah, that's it. I think Devourers you already mentioned. So, yeah. And since I'm also, I think one of the recent books is purely like academic writing, but if anyone's interested in the book that I really liked recently was by Sami Ahmed Khan. Yeah, he's written a full-length study of Indian science fiction. He's a writer himself, so kind of academic writing that he's brought and the kind of insights as a practicing writer that he's brought into his academic theorizing the genre is something that is also very new. And I think only somebody who's a practicing writer could have done something like that. They understand things about uh, the craft like writing. So yeah, I would recommend that. It's a very accessible book, very
What is it called?
um, Indian science fiction. I think mythology, materiality, and
Okay.
ideology. You can look it up. It's, uh,
Hey, okay, I'll do that. I mean, I think if I just look the author up and get the book
yeah.
as well.
It's
So,
called Indian science fiction. Yeah. Yeah.
so I
I
make
have
it my own. Okay, were you saying something?
I have one more book recommendation. This book I read last year called House in the Cerulean Sea by
Oh
P.J.
yes, you
Hook.
heard of it. Yes.
Beautiful. It's about like a group of orphans who are growing up on this island, and it's a world where children who have magical powers are looked down upon. So this an inspector is sent to the island to deem if the orphanage should be remain open or closed, and the book is really with so much of kindness, so much of love, and it's wholesome, and it talks about a lot of relevant issues. It talks about disability and gender identity and discrimination, but all of it is handled with so much of positivity and hope and kindness. It's beautiful. Like it's like as we're talking about escapism and the power of fantasy to tell positive stories like this book it perfectly nails it. And after reading the book, it just feels like someone just gave you a warm hug. So
Oh,
also has a kind of a slow burn queer romance as well. So it's just the perfect book. I loved it and I would definitely recommend it
Uh,
to everyone.
okay. So the thing is,
Your
I made
recommendation.
yeah, that's what I was getting at. So I prepared a list before, but I'm going to chuck it because I got inspiration from all of you. So Shetuti talked about comic speculative fiction. So I'm going to talk about the one book which made me smile, made me laugh out loud when I was looking through a lot of it. From Good Omens, Good Omens. It is absolutely so funny. It was very nice, and I don't know if this can be classified as speculative fiction, but this is another book.
uh,
This is a reworking of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's called Poor Things. It's the funniest book I have ever read. It's the funniest. It's by Alice Clare Gray. It's by Alice Clare. It's the funniest book I've ever read. From it's like I don't want to keep anything away. Just read it. Very difficult to describe as well. It uses all sorts of fonts. It's like a diary sort of thing. So it's absolutely brilliant with the sense of humor to me on it. And what I was talking about, speculative fiction using drawing on Russian folklore, right? So, which reminded me of Catherine and Cullen's Deathless, which again was something I really liked reading. It was beautiful. It was extremely well crafted. The prose was beautiful. The story, of course, I don't know a lot about the political background, so I won't be able to comment on that. Of course, the non-Russian person talking about a Western person talking about communism, so there might be pitfalls, but well, I loved reading the book, so it was very nice. And Omkit mentioned the graphic novel that was his first recommendation. So actually talk about one of my favorite graphic novels, which again is magical realism. Sharnath Banerjee's The Bar Now is Wanted Papers. Absolutely brilliant. Again, this is also very funny, especially for people acquainted with Kolkata and a bit of Bengali culture and things like that. It's absolutely funny. The sense of humor is everything, as well as the art. Like sometimes he uses posters and things like that, which he does in his other books as well, especially Harappa Files. This is the entire page full of Boroni, tiny Boroni. So it's really funny and nice. And other than that, I would recommend The Last Check into Laughter by Richard Joshi. It's not very well known, but it's semi-alternate history. It talks about a distant, like a near future where the Chinese are a very dominant presence in India and climate change has happened. There's no water anywhere, but he also talks about it with a lot of humor and it's really poignant. Like there's a really interesting timeline which goes back to India's freedom struggles, the non-cooperation movement, and then the story grew when he was writing in the 90s and early 2000s, and then to a near future where climate change has sort of changed the land, changed the cityscape and the kind of resources available to people. So I really liked reading this book. And then there's Khelna Nogor by Nobarun Bhattacharya, which is dystopian fiction. Talks about an extremely toxic future. It's a very bleak book. I mean, like read it when you have the headspace to handle such bleak. So that and but like his other books too, as well. Like actually, it's a bit Kangal Malshak, of Impact. It's a really that again is a really hard hitting book. It reminded me of Wes Anderson's movie. The Isle of Dogs. And then my last recommendation, I would cheat a little. I'll recommend a movie, something that has stayed with me all my life. When I was a kid, I watched it and I went back to the theaters and I watched it twice. When I was class 4. That was a big deal when I was a kid. It's actually Patal Ghar. Directed by, it's actually based on Shishendu Mukhopadhyay's novel and it's directed by Elvis Presley. Um, OPG something, I've forgotten his surname. It's something. It's absolutely mind blowing. It is again. It's directed by OPG Chaudhary. It's very funny. It was way ahead of its time because most people did not understand. It won two national level awards, and it has everything. It has a village, village in Bengal called Nichudipur. It has aliens. It has a spaceship. It has the international sort of weapon cartel sort of thing. The villain is a woman, so which is a very interesting thing, like the way they use with gender, because the original book does not have that sort of that figure, which is probably just created for the movie. And there was this scientist and this young boy who was very very curious. So the central story is about this gadget which can put everyone to sleep. It was invented by a scientist 150 years ago who hid it in his underground chamber on the Kandahar. So that movie has stayed with me. I have memorized the dialogue. I still remember everything. So that's my last recommendation. Please watch it. It's on YouTube. It's absolutely the best thing ever. So, with that, I have to end this podcast now. Thank you so much for coming and talking about speculative fiction, giving us beautiful recommendations. All three of you of kids. Chitra Shetty is one of our own. I couldn't have to thank her, but I will thank her anyway. Thank you. Have a lovely night and work. Yeah. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.